In the Pilates mat work, there really isn't a lot of weight bearing through the feet. Basically, you've got your shoulder bridge, you've got your push-ups at the end, and you have that little bit of side weight bearing on the foot in your side planks. But other than that, it's really an open chain through the arms and the legs. However, it's really important to emphasize the dexterity and mobility of the ankle and foot joints in mat work, even though we're not weight bearing. Because when we do come weight bearing into footwork on the reformer, or even your stomach massage, and even onto the chair, that mental connection and therefore strength building, when we do get to add springs and close the chain, it'll be easier to access that whole kinetic chain through the knees and hips if you've been visualizing and activating that mobilization in the mat work. Now in the mat work, I like to add it in wherever I can. For example, let's just pretend I'm on the mat even though I'm on the reformer, because you know I'm gonna pull it all together, right? Okay, so if we're getting into the whole hamstring stretch, maybe a little climb a tree, it's really early in the morning and I'm not warm, so here I am climbing, right, up and down, right? Well, what if even here we look at the idea of plantar flexion and dorsiflexion? I just said that backwards, of course. This is plantar flexion as a point, dorsiflexion as a flex. Now here's what's important about the flex. We want to think about the flexion and this shape as if we're standing on the floor. Sometimes you could take a yoga block for sensory awareness and put it on top of your foot. But what you will see so often is people get caught in their patterns of supination and their patterns of pronation, of inversion and eversion. Now here's the thing, you need those ranges of your ankle. You do. Okay, that is how we are able to move laterally and how we're able to move through sagittal plane and all the planes, right? And push weight through our feet when we are weight bearing. So if we don't practice this pathway, are we really, really ready? And so when we get into circling the foot, you should see this evert, plantar flexion, into a little pronation, into a little inversion, then peel from the toes, come back around, and then take it back around the other way. When we're going through plantar dorsiflexion and dorsiflexion, articulating toes last, as if this is your heel ball toe to walk, right? Sometimes even adding this flex knee bend, heel ball toe, because that is us taking a step. For that matter, if we were to walk backwards, we'd go into plantar dorsiflexion. It really is hard to keep them straight, I know, so just say point and flex, it's fine. When we go to flex, pulling the toes back, the metatarsal ball of the foot, the tarsal bones is the center of the foot, finding where we get into the length of the calf and the concentric work of all the anterior and medial muscles of the shin, and can we maintain that level feeling of standing on the floor, okay? And when we bring that into footwork on the reformer, right? If I'm just gonna take an easy stomach massage, I'm only on 2 leg springs just to show you what we're talking about in the feet. If I don't have that mobility through the tarsal joints, when I get to pressing out, and this goes the same for laying down in your footwork, you'll see this dropping, and you will see where the imbalance around the muscles of the ankle, shin, calf pull us into what habits of inversion, eversion, supination that are affecting the entire chain up into our hips. And that is our gait, right? That is our walk. So when we're getting into footwork, we're really looking at how to pass work through the strength of the arch, which is what we need to propel us when we're walking forward. Also, we need it to have a strength and resilience to catch us when we land. We spring out of our arches. They also are our first shock absorbers for when we land. So if every time we're pressing out on the footwork, there's a dropping, there's a falling, there's maybe even the in, right? What's going on there? Take that back to the idea of your pathway through flexing and pointing and circling. And again, let's remember, you don't need to move your whole thigh just to move your foot and ankle, okay? So that way, when we do get into the footwork, stomach massage work, again, stomach massage is just footwork seated, you know, hold it on in different shapes, right? When I get into that idea of tendon stretch or calf raises, really, I don't want to see this falling. You see how that puts all this weight down here, okay? Well, I want to see where the strength of the arch catches. This is what we refer to as doming the foot. It's also referring to that classical position of bird on a perch, right? When we actually put the arches around in our footwork to press out. This is not about dropping and falling apart. This is also not about pretty pointing over. It's about strengthening the concentric contraction of the intrinsic muscles of the foot as something that therefore we again can shift weight through when we lower lift, i.e. point and flex. Now, let's take it also over to the chair because it kind of really isolates the work a little bit more for you to see. So now we're over onto the chair for footwork or your pumping. Now remember, the pumping is different simply because it has an accent, whereas if you're gonna do your footwork, you're gonna have more of a steady up and down and not so much of a dynamic pulse, okay? But you notice that I've put a little roller under here, and that's because I today want to show you the 90-90 and lift of just being able to stand into the pedal from the hips. Now, if we do footwork here, Pilates stance with those heels together, as we come up, we're actually now asking for minimal movement in the ankle joint. We want it to come from the hips, and then the knees follow, and we're thinking, can we lift up into the strength of our backs? Again, I'm on a light spring because I want to focus on this while I run my mouth. So when I press down with this action of from my extensors pushing down to take me taller, if I fall when I come up, there's this instability that's going to happen, right? I really want to try and lock into that strength of my spine and core and really work that fine-tuned flexion deep in the hips. And when we change positions of the feet, going into parallel, can we still keep that activation and still keep that standing shape? The minute we start letting it wiggle about and wiggle around, we're affecting the entire kinetic chain all the way up into our hips. And guess what? The lumbar's gonna have a little wiggle, okay? Same with the heels. Now when we get back into this dorsiflexion flex foot, we're looking for that sense of, again, standing on the floor, right? We stand in dorsiflexion. We just don't really think about it, right? And we know we want to keep that weight over our foot centers, not give it too much wiggle outside to side. But the minute we have to move around in space, we need that work, okay? Now, there is a tendon stretch variation that a lot of people have never seen before. You can do this in your parallel or in your Pilates stance. And there's two different choices. When we do mobilize the ankles, keep tall. Make the choice, leave the pedal still, so that when we find a lowering down into flexion, we see that extension work happening in the hip, a little bit of change in the angle in the knee. Keep the pedal down, lift, feel weight shift through the dome of the arch. Look again to keep that center. No wiggling apart unless we are legs apart. And some people will need that, okay? I'm not necessarily talking about what we need to manage all this. We're just thinking about the feet. Now, if I choose the other option, so here I am, leaving the pedal down, which causes the entire chain to move. Now, what if I'm here? I'm gonna give my hands a little hello, because again, I'm not that warm. Now, when I come into flexion and let the pedal move, we are now, getting isometric work all the way out through all the thighs, top thighs, bottom thighs, inner thighs, all the thighs. And we're really working that fine-tuned connection of calf, shin, as well as the intrinsic muscles of the foot and ankle. But it is a lot of stabilizing work around the knees, hips, and all the way back up through the chain, right? And again, I'm gonna circle back to, even though there's not a lot of weight bearing in the mat work, there's a lot you can do with the foot and ankle to prepare for when we spring load on all of the other equipment, so that we manage the fact that we are, weight bearing on our feet quite a lot in life. So feet matter.